So we're going to go ahead and get started with our next presenters. I wanted to welcome Ryan Burke, Rachel Hawkins, and Andrea Millsap. Ryan is the Director of Professional Affairs with PTCB and has been the director for the past 4 years. Rachel is a coworker of mine and a great friend. She's also, that's not the only reason she's up here, she is also a certified pharmacy technician and the clinical educator, I know I was going to blow it, Rachel, the clinical education coordinator for Forsyth Tech. And Andrea is a certified pharmacy technician and the operations manager at Boone Pharmacy. I figured who better to lead our discussion here on the advancement roles of pharmacy technicians. And I want to please welcome both Ryan, Rachel, and Andrea to the podium.
Thanks. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hi again. Thanks again for having us. I'm very excited, mostly for you, because you only have to listen to me talk for like 15 minutes. And then we're going to listen to Andrea and Rachel have a discussion about some of the advanced roles and opportunities that are out there for pharmacy technicians. And so I have nothing to disclose other than that I work at PTCB. We're going to talk a little bit about advanced roles for pharmacy technicians. We're going to talk about some of the expansion of those advanced roles. I'm going to give you an overview of the regulatory landscape. Obviously, being able to do more things in practice relies a lot on boards of pharmacy allowing pharmacy technicians to do those things. We will talk a little bit about credentials for pharmacy technicians, and then we'll give you an opportunity to think about ways that you could incorporate advanced roles into your practice if you're not already doing that. So just some really quick facts or history about the pharmacy technician career. There are about 420,000 pharmacy technicians in the United States right now. And this definition that you see here on the screen is how the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics defines pharmacy technicians. I think this is missing a lot of things, right? Pharmacy technicians do a lot more than simply help dispense prescription medications, right? There are many, many more duties that technicians, like many of you in the room, take on. During the pandemic, as I think many of you know, there was a huge spike in hiring, particularly early on among the chains, for pharmacy technicians to help meet the really significant increase in demand that they were experiencing relatively early on in the pandemic. Most of you probably know, employers are telling us they have a really hard time hiring pharmacy technicians right now. Not surprisingly, the states with the largest population also have the highest demand for pharmacy technicians. But we really are seeing unprecedented numbers of job openings for pharmacy technicians throughout the country in all practice settings. ASHP put out a survey not all that long ago where they looked at the vacancy rate and the turnover rate among pharmacy technicians in health systems. And it's about 3 times what it was just a few years ago. And so it's a really significant issue and challenge, certainly for employers, but also for all the pharmacists and technicians that work in those settings and are not fully staffed. We're all familiar with what technicians traditionally do. And again, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And again, I think these are some of the pretty basic duties that don't really encompass everything that even a, quote, traditional pharmacy technician might be doing in practice today. So over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a really dramatic shift in the percentage of pharmacists that are providing clinical services. And so this is from a workforce survey that AAPT does every handful of years. And you can see in 2004, only about 13% of pharmacists who responded to that survey said they were providing MTM, or medication therapy management. And then 15 years later, that number was 67%. And then immunizations was also relatively low. And then fast forward 15 years, about 90% of pharmacists responded that they were providing immunization services. There is not currently a similar survey for pharmacy technicians, but I would anticipate that there is a huge spike in the number of pharmacy technicians that are providing immunization services. We know from APHA alone, which has really the predominant training program for technician immunization administration, that they've trained more than 100,000 technicians over the last 2 years to administer vaccines. So what are some of the advanced roles? So I know in talking to some of you earlier during the break, some of you fill these advanced roles, and they're probably not all encompassed here on the screen. And there are many more, and we're seeing growth in this area. Probably the most prevalent one is technicians giving immunizations. There are 23 states and counting that now allow pharmacy technicians to administer vaccines on a permanent basis. Prior to the pandemic, there were just 5. There were states that were sort of beginning to talk about it, but they weren't really making any real progress toward changing their rules. And then fast forward to the pandemic and the need for many people to be involved in the mass vaccination effort. The federal government stepped in and said technicians can immunize. And so 20 plus states have now followed suit, and even after the public health emergency is declared over, technicians will be able to continue to provide vaccines in those states. We use a tool to track what employers are hiring, how many jobs are open. That was that map that you saw earlier. And one of the things the tool also tells us is what skills employers are commonly requesting in job descriptions. And I will tell you that the terminology here is not necessarily terminology we use in pharmacy, but this tool tracks all occupations. And so if some of the words look a little weird, that's because of the way the tool defines various skills. But what I think is really interesting about this is 2 years ago, immunization administration was nowhere to be found in the top 20 requested skills by employers. And now in 2022, it is in the top 5. That means many, many job descriptions, particularly on the community side, have immunization administration as a skill that is either preferred or required as part of getting whatever that job may be. And then certainly common skills. These are things that can apply to any occupation. They're not specific to pharmacy. And these are things that are more soft skills, right? These are things that you might not be able to learn in a classroom or through a textbook, but these are things that are very important to the role of a pharmacy technician. So shifting gears, I'd like to share with you kind of where things stand in terms of the regulatory landscape throughout the country. I would say over the last 3 to 4 years, there has been more activity at the state level as it relates to pharmacy technician practice than there has been in the previous couple of decades. I think a lot of that is driven by the pandemic, but certainly even before that, there were lots of states that were looking at things like ratio, looking at allowing technicians to do product verification, looking at additional or advanced education and training requirements for pharmacy technicians. And so the activity has really picked up. But there are 46 states plus DC that require registration or licensure. So there are still a few states that do not register or license technicians. It's Hawaii, Delaware, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are getting close. They've passed legislation. The boards of pharmacy there are writing the rules, and so technicians in those states will soon have to be registered with the board. But Delaware and Hawaii, to my knowledge at least, are not talking about it quite yet. A little less than half of the states require certification, and just 9 states require technicians to maintain their certification. Now, we know many, many employers, particularly on the health system side, require technicians to maintain certification as a condition of employment. And so those requirements, even in the states that don't require certification, employers tend to drive kind of whether or not technicians get certified. When we ask technicians on surveys, why do you get certified? The top answer is because I have to, right? Somebody told me I had to get certified. That is not true, however, of our newer credentials, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. And then these are just a few of the other things. Lots of states have a ratio, but there are many states considering expanding or even eliminating the ratio altogether. And there are currently 14 states that have a technician's seat on their board of pharmacy. This is something we would like to see grow, of course. We think it's very important that technicians have a voice at the regulatory level. And so we were just at the NABP, the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy meeting, not that long ago. And there were a number of states there who said, now that they know that there are some states that have these technician seats on their board, that they may look into doing that as well. So I certainly hope to see that grow in the future. So the teal color here is where there is sort of recent or pending activity related to technicians. And so I'll just point out a couple things that I think are of interest. One is around education and training for pharmacy technicians. So there's a lot of talk about this in many states, but there are only a few states that have actually taken action in recent years. So not all that long ago, Louisiana put into effect a requirement that all pharmacy technicians go through an accredited education and training program in order to enter the workforce. Very limited exceptions that the board doesn't really see very often, but the vast majority of the workforce, once that rule went into effect, had to go through accredited education and training. Virginia has those similar requirements that just went into effect as of July 1st, and then Illinois has those requirements going into effect in 2024. North Dakota is the state that has probably had that requirement in for the longest period of time. And then the rest of the states, some have very few requirements, if any at all. Others might have something that's sort of in between, so like board-approved training. So the board has to give a blessing to your training program before you're able to use that for pharmacy technicians to enter the workforce. But this is something that I think will become a bit more prevalent, but probably not to the point that it's in all 50 states anytime soon. And then the other thing that is of interest is there are two states that have for a number of years now been considering creating a separate license category for advanced pharmacy technicians, and that's California and New Hampshire. California has worked on this for many, many years. They've put it on their agenda, taken it off their agenda. It's back on the agenda. And so we'll see if anything happens over the next couple of years related to an advanced pharmacy technician license in California. And then in New Hampshire, they've actually done it. So the rules are almost across the finish line. And in New Hampshire, it will be called a licensed advanced pharmacy technician. It does require some additional training. It requires you to earn or complete a certain number of training programs or earn certain PTCB credentials if you choose to go down that path. It requires you to have a minimum of 2,000 hours of work experience as a certified technician. And then it allows you to do things like administer immunizations and engage in product verification. That was a multi-year process to get to that point. I think the big question that we will not know for a while is how many technicians will take advantage of that, right? How many employers will recognize that a technician has become an advanced pharmacy technician and adjust responsibilities and compensation accordingly, right? It's too early to know that, but there are certainly people in New Hampshire who hope that this will help elevate and push the technician profession forward. And then I mentioned Technician Immunization Authority, so this just shows you which states either have pending rules or final rules that are somewhere in the process of allowing technicians to administer immunizations on a permanent basis after the public health emergency is over. All right, so finally, credential opportunities. So when I was looking at the attendee list, I noticed that nearly all of you are certified by PTCB. So thank you for that, number one. There are lots of 20-plus year folks on that list as well. So since 1995, the Certified Pharmacy Technician credential has been our flagship credential. We have more than 280,000 technicians that currently hold the CPHT credential through us, and we give about 30 to 35,000 new certifications every year. We launched the sterile compounding credential in 2017, and then in late 2018, we started to think about what's the next step. Where are technician roles going? What are the credentials that can help people get into these roles? What are the credentials that will help technicians demonstrate or showcase specialized knowledge or skill? And so we really had two options. One was to create an advanced exam. So think of the pharmacy technician certification exam times 10, right? What's the advanced level knowledge that is required for somebody to work in an advanced or specialized role? But that really wasn't feasible for a couple of reasons. One is that it varies greatly by practice setting, right? So what an advanced or specialized technician can do in a hospital or health system is very different in most cases than what they can do in a community pharmacy. And it also varies widely depending on where you live, right? What technicians can do from state to state varies greatly. And so that really was not feasible in terms of creating one exam that could measure all of that knowledge. And so instead, we went with this path of providing a menu of options for technicians to select what makes the most sense for their job, for their career, and certainly for employers also to utilize these to help build career ladders. And that is ultimately our goal with these, is that employers recognize them, they make them part of either professional development, they make them opportunities to get from level 1, 2, 3, 4, or into a specialized role. And then, of course, I hope this goes without saying, but also that the employers pay the cost of attaining the training and the credential, right? So this really is a choose-your-own-adventure based on what your needs are and what your areas of interest are. And so this is almost all of the credentials. Regulatory compliance and supply chain management are missing from this slide, but that is because those are relatively new and just launched very recently. So in the pharmacy world, there are many certificates and certifications, and so you might wonder, what is the difference? And so this table kind of outlines all of the differences, but there are a few things that are important for all of you. One is, with a certification program, this measures your knowledge on a broad range of topics, right? If you think about the pharmacy technician certification exam that you took when you got certified, it's not focused just on one thing, right? There are several knowledge domains. It really encompasses a body of knowledge that is required for pharmacy technicians to work at the entry level. Whereas certificate programs are much more laser focused on a specific set of knowledge. So if you think about medication history, immunizations, MTM. And then certification programs require renewal. So in the case of PTCB, it has to be renewed every 2 years, requires continuing education. And in the case of certificate programs, no renewal or maintenance is required. So once you earn, let's say, the medication history certificate or the product verification certificate, you are not required to do any specific education or continuing education to maintain that. You get to keep that credential forever. And so I did mention we just launched supply chain management, and then our final for a while will be non-sterile compounding, and that is coming in 2023. Several of you asked me out at the table about eligibility requirements for each of these programs. I'd encourage you to check out our website. Each program has its own set of eligibility criteria. For the most part, that is completing an online training program through a recognized provider. There are a couple of programs, however, product verification, med history, sterile compounding is another one, where work experience can also allow you to qualify if you have enough experience and do not necessarily need to go through a training program. And then finally, I know there are a few of you in the room who have already earned CPHT Advanced. Of course, Rachel and Andrea. Others that have earned CPHT Advanced? Yes, okay, thank you. We have just about, I think we just hit 1,000 technicians who have earned this throughout the country. And since we are in North Carolina actually has the highest number of advanced CPHTs of any state in the country, both by number and also by percentage of CPHTs overall. I don't know why that is necessarily. I'd love to figure out why that is, and we can share that with other states. But I was looking at that just a few weeks ago, and I thought it was cool that I'm coming to North Carolina, and you have the highest percentage of CPHT Advanced folks. So the way that you get to this is be an active CPHT, complete at least 4 certificate programs, or have that sterile compounding credential plus 3 certificate programs, and then have at least 3 years of work experience in the last 8 years. And then once you earn CPHT Advanced, you're required to have 5 additional hours of CE every 2 years to maintain that. All right, so I'm done talking. And now we're going to shift gears to Andrea and Rachel. And so I would encourage you all to also think of questions for these two folks who have earned CPHT Advanced and who work in kind of advanced or specialized roles within each of their practice settings. So I have a list of questions for each of them, and then we'll open it up to all of you in the last 10 minutes or so of our hour together to ask anything, any questions you have of me or of Andrea and Rachel. So I don't know who wants to go first. You can flip a coin maybe. It looks like it's going to be Rachel. All right, so the first question for you is just to kind of tell us about yourself, years of experience, where you work, what you do, and maybe why you became a pharmacy technician.
Okay. So my name's Rachel Hawkins, and I've been a pharmacy technician for about 20 years. I got certified by PTCB in 2005. I've primarily worked in hospital pharmacy and with that table over there, Cone Health. My journey to being a pharmacy technician started non-traditionally. I went to art school, and when I graduated, my mom said, "You need to get a job with benefits." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I just took a certification class and kind of worked in a hospital pharmacy for about 2 years. And then when I felt comfortable, I took the certification exam. And then really it's been, I think, the mentorship of other pharmacy technicians that I've worked alongside and pharmacists that have encouraged me to pursue not just my advanced certification, but also to go back to school. And in 2016, I went back and I got my associate's degree. Working in North Carolina, if you have your associate's degree, you can be a product verification technician in hospital settings. So that was something that I didn't necessarily want to do, but should that be put on our plate to do it, I wanted to be able to take advantage of that and to also just kind of grow my own resume. And then recently, last November, I actually stepped down from the specialist role that I had in automation, and I became a clinical education coordinator at Forsyth Tech, which is a community college in Winston-Salem, so that I could grow future pharmacy technicians because I saw a need for it. In my role in the hospital, I helped train and onboard technicians and pharmacy students and pharmacy residents that were coming in, and I really saw a need for education before they came through the door, and to really have someone to support and guide them so that they weren't lost when they came into the hospital or when they came into any pharmacy setting, really, and to give them that foundation that they needed. So that's what brought me to it. I really think that being able to sort of choose my own path, really with the advancement certification, helped me sort of guide what my interests were in terms of which tests I wanted to take. I took the controlled substance, the hazardous drug, product verification, and medication reconciliation, because those were all things that I had a passion for in hospital pharmacy. So that sort of made it a little bit easier to make those decisions.
Thanks. Go ahead, Andrea.
Oh, okay. So I'm Andrea Millsaps. I am a pharmacy technician at an independent called Boone Drugs in Boone, North Carolina. I don't know if anybody knows where Boone's at, but oh, good. So I've been there. Next month will be 21 years. And so I'm the lead technician there and operations manager. I maybe got the advanced role a year or so ago. I can't even remember. But since then I've been offered to maybe start some training with new technicians when they come in the door, just because there, like she said, there needs to be training before you come in, because when you work in a community pharmacy, you know that what you read on a book that tells us what we're going to be doing is not what we do every day. So it's been nice to be offered that. We're still thinking about maybe doing that. It's just all of our Boone Drugs may have all the same standards and procedures and everything, but you know, every manager is going to miss something when they're training the technicians and such. So maybe that might be a great opportunity for us to do that, but they offered me that because I did go on and get more certifications with PTCB. I initially just started taking extra classes just for myself. It was a goal, and I wanted to learn more and know more and be able to do more. It did help with immunizations. In our location, we do a lot of COVID testing, so our company started doing for certified technicians, if you trained, you could start doing COVID testing to help out the company. So we do a majority of that at our location. So that's been helpful in the past couple of years. So it's been a little wild, but I'm not nearly as amazing as she is. I just work at a little pharmacy.
You are.
I've done the same thing for 20 some years, so mine's pretty boring.
You're both amazing. Okay. So you both brought up something that I mentioned earlier, that when we ask people why they get certified, it's generally because someone said they had to, either the Board of Pharmacy or their employer. What we have found with these new credentials is people are earning them because they want to. A lot of the people, we have a little over 4,000 individuals who have taken one or more of the assessment-based certificates at this point. And most of them tell us they do this because either they're just interested in learning about something new, and we do have some anecdotes about some employers that are beginning to incorporate the credentials into career ladders or into job descriptions, and that helps both with pay and also with justifying covering the cost, right? They can convince HR, especially in a hospital or health system, that if it is something that is required for the position, that the health system or hospital can cover the cost. And so thank you for sharing kind of why you pursued these. Andrea, we can start with you for this one, but can you tell us a little bit about which certificate programs you earned? Maybe did you find one to be the most difficult, one to be really easy? Kind of what was your experience?
So I did billing and reimbursement, product verification, medication history, and the immunization certificate. The hardest one for me, which I did not expect to be hard, I just took it because I'm like, I do this every day and this is going to be easy, was billing and reimbursement. I thought that was the hardest one that I took, but it was very informative. I learned a lot. It's helped me just in my day-to-day. So the other certifications definitely helped to get the advanced role, but that one was the hardest, and probably learned more from that one than some of the others.
Rachel, what about you?
I already covered.
Yeah, you did.
Which ones I
Did you find one to be very difficult or one to be?
Yeah, I think for me, even though I dealt with controlled substances every day, that one was a little bit more difficult for me with the background paperwork side of it. I handled them, but didn't necessarily file all the paperwork. So that one, to me, I learned a lot from it.
Okay, thank you. So you've jumped ahead on all of my questions here. So can you maybe, Rachel, we'll start with you, but since you've earned CPHT Advanced, has there been any, you talked about kind of your voluntary shift to academia, but has there been anything different about your roles or responsibilities that have changed as a result of earning the credential, or do you think that, how are those two things related, if at all?
So for me, I think that my shift to academia was already happening when I was pursuing, but it was in the process of pursuing those certifications, I sort of had an aha moment where I was like, oh wait, there's more to this. I can teach this. Mm-hmm. And being able to learn about it and then provide that knowledge to other future technicians, I think was kind of really helpful for me.
Thank you. Andrea, you jumped ahead again, but
I'm sorry.
And in addition to your role, if either of you are comfortable sharing, if there's any change to pay or those sorts of opportunities as a result of credentials as well.
Yes. Like I said, I did mine just because I wanted to, so it wasn't offered that I would get an increase in pay, but once I got the certifications, I just kind of sent them over to HR like, hey, I have this now, and it did. It helped, and they did give some, an increase in pay. And I was going to say also, after getting the certified advanced, I kind of just sent my resume out just to see what else is out there, because I think people think that all that pharmacy technicians do is work in a pharmacy, and like a customer said to me one day, you just take pills out of a big bottle and put them into a small bottle. That's all you do. And I was like, okay. So I did that just to see the kind of things that people would reach back with. And there's a lot of offers out there for pharmacy technicians, whether it be the hospital with billing or different doctors' offices and stuff. So, getting that advanced credential has helped my role where I'm at, plus just to help open my eyes of what else is available. but I can't get away from community pharmacy. I mean, I love it. So I just keep coming right back to where I'm at, so.
Yeah, well, and I think, one of the things that we sometimes hear from employers on the community side is that it can sometimes be more difficult to find well-defined career ladders, because in a community pharmacy, a lot of times everybody wears sort of every hat. But it sounds like maybe your employer has found a way to potentially plug you into something that is unique to a pharmacy technician.
Definitely.
Is that true?
That's
okay.
very true.
Yeah, and I heard yesterday from a technician in Massachusetts where the health system where they work is actually trying to create a director role for a pharmacy technician to oversee all of in addition to the education and training program, kind of the career ladder for pharmacy technicians for the entire health system, which is 18 hospitals. And I think that would be a really cool role for a pharmacy technician in the health system world as well. All right, so this is a little more philosophical, which is, where do you see the pharmacy technician profession going? Do you have any prediction in your crystal ball of how things might look different in 5 or 10 or 15 years from now?
I don't know if I have a prediction. I have hopes that with all the new certifications and all the need for pharmacy technicians, that it's just more recognized as, a great job, a lot of smart people, a lot of hardworking people. So I just hope the incentive, is there for more pay for everyone, and some training opportunities that people don't have to pay for themselves, have companies pay for the training and certifications. That's what I'm hopeful for. I don't know if I envision that happening, but I have high hopes of that.
Rachel?
So I've had this conversation a couple times with other colleagues, and we've sort of likened to where pharmacy technicians are going to being like PAs to physicians, to where pharmacy technicians are becoming sort of that sub-pharmacist category.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on your setting, depending on your setting and the support that you have around you, and how much you're willing to push, you can really break through a lot of barriers in terms of leadership roles, administrative roles. So I'm hoping that pharmacy technicians in general can become more recognized, and if they're not already respected in their state, become more recognized and respected in each state.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that we are seeing that particularly among boards of pharmacy, right, the regulators. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about immunizations is that really early on in the pandemic, when that guidance first came out from the federal government that technicians in all 50 states, as long as they met the requirements, could administer immunizations, obviously lots of boards of pharmacy were talking about it. And I listened in on a lot of those calls, and there was one board in particular, I won't name the state, but they were very skeptical. We don't need technicians to do this. We have plenty of capacity with pharmacists doing this. This is silly. Fast forward a few months later, after many of those pharmacists who were on the board had worked with technicians who were administering immunizations and saw how it helped their workflow, it was a complete 180. We need technicians to do this. We should change our rules to allow technicians to do this on a permanent basis. And so I think having that firsthand experience helps people who are in those positions of decision-making understand how important and valuable pharmacy technicians are to every aspect of the pharmacy workflow. And it does sound like, based on what I've been hearing from employers, there are these opportunities for leadership, administration, creeping up. It's just not as widespread or prevalent as we want it to be, right? We want it to go faster. All right. What advice do you have for technicians who might want to pursue one or more of these credentials or want to work their way to CPHT Advanced?
I would say look at what's offered and just find one that speaks to you. Maybe it's something that you've been thinking about with billing and reimbursement, or with the USP 800 talk that we had earlier today of the hazardous drug handling. It's not just, I don't see it as just another thing to sort of check off. I really learned a lot from the courses that I took, things that I could apply. more than I thought I would. And I think that any time that you can sort of put another tool in your tool belt, it helps you. It helps make you more marketable should things change in the future. So that's
I say go for it. Just do it. You're smart. You're gonna do great. I am a huge advocate of just learning, continuing to learn, and there's so much to learn, and it just continues. And you would be amazed when you're sitting there reading these before you take your exam. You're like, oh, okay, I don't need to know any of this, but there's going to be a day when you're in the pharmacy and you're going to snap back to that program, and if you're going to figure out how to do something or problem solve through some of those classes and tests that you take. So I say go for it. Like she said, find something that kind of goes into your realm of what you do in the pharmacy and get those certifications. I think it's a great opportunity.
And then, Andrea, this one is mostly for you, to start at least, which is you talked about, well, I guess where I'm going with this is, can you tell us a little bit about the conversation that led to you being offered this opportunity to potentially bill training? Do you have any advice from that conversation of how to advocate for yourself?
You want me to be honest?
Yes.
The president of our company found out I'd sent my resume out to other people, so he came and asked for a meeting with me, which lasted about an hour and a half, and was just trying to motivate me to stay where I'm at. And like I said, I'm glad that he did. I mean, it's hard to get away from community pharmacy. Once you've been there, you gain a relationship with these people and you learn to just love them, and they become family. So that's what led to that conversation about offering the position of training and help the new technicians that are coming in. So that was the reason for that.
Well, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Rachel, what about you? Do you have any advice for people about how to advocate for themselves to their employers?
I think that it's really about finding a voice for yourself and not letting someone speak for you. There's a lot of people that try, behind the scenes, they feel like they should be recognized, but they never speak up for themselves. And a lot of times the administrators that are working in the offices, they know what you do, but they may not know what you do. And to be able to say that you're willing to put in the effort to further your education or to get additional certificates, it starts to say something about your seriousness of your career. And that's what it is. Pharmacy technology is a career. It's a profession. And a lot of generationally, maybe not generationally, but a lot of old school pharmacists don't necessarily see the value in furthering yourself or furthering your education or getting other certificates, because it doesn't maybe change your day to day, but it could. And it's just something to make even just for yourself, to say, hey, I could do that. I did it. So.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to open it up to all of you for questions for Andrea and Rachel, or for me, if you have any PTCB-related questions, happy to try to answer those as well. So, go for it. You're not a shy group.
I've been a pharmacy technician since 1978, so I've seen a lot of different things, and I've worked in a lot of different practices. I want to congratulate you guys for taking the courses to become advanced, because I think that's amazing. What PTCB is offering is wonderful. I now work in a hospital setting that our new director has already laid out like a career ladder with your guidelines on your courses that you're offering, and the pay scale is different. So we have a lot of excited technicians to start choosing what path they want to take. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just, in case not everyone could hear, where you work now has begun to lay out sort of a career ladder, career path that incorporates the new programs that are offered. And we do have we have a few examples of employers doing that. One of the things that sometimes people ask us about is, do we ever see these credentials being required by boards of pharmacy? And our answer is no. That was not our intent in creating these. Our intent was for employers to use them to recognize and build that career ladder for technicians. We consider all of our credentials to be voluntary credentials, but of course, boards of pharmacy have incorporated CPHT, at least half of them or so, into their regulatory framework. And so we have had a couple of boards ask us specifically about the technician product verification credential. And what we have said to them is, if you want to make that part of your rules, that's fine, but it should be a pathway, but not the only pathway, right? Because we recognize that, particularly for employers that have had technicians engaged in product verification, as one example, for a really long time, they've built their own training programs, their own validation programs, and so having this other separate thing might not be necessary. And so that is not our intent with these. They really are intended for technicians and for employers. So thank you for sharing that. Other questions or comments?
I'll say that
Chris.
the learning and the process of going through all the different programs was so fantastic and made me a stronger technician with every single exam. Even if I never earned an extra dime, which I did, it would have been worth it tenfold. It really made me a better and stronger technician and improves my patient safety with every single program.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. I think I saw a hand. Yes.
I'm Priya. I have your problem. I don't know how to put the retail. My customers will not be fit. One couple even brought me 2 bottles of portals just to say.
I understand. They say, I'm not coming back if you're gone.
Yeah.
So,
I share your love for the profession. Thank you.
In the back.
About statistics, but you said 21 states require certification.
Yes.
So why do only 9 states require recertification?
Yeah, so the question is, why do only 9 states require recertification if 21 require certification? So in most of those states that require certification but do not require recertification, they have their own continuing education requirements that are either annual or biannual. And so in lieu of having to maintain certification, as long as you meet those CE requirements and submit that to, well, they use CPE Monitor now, but as long as you attest that you completed that CE when you renew your registration or license with the board, then you're good to go. We find that well, I shouldn't say the vast majority, but we find that a lot of people recertify because their employer requires them to recertify. And on an annual basis, about 80% of CPHTs recertify. So our retention is around 80%. Prior to the pandemic, we were actually seeing like a little uptick in retention, and we thought that was a good sign that people were staying in the profession longer. I don't know if that holds true today. As obviously the workforce changed a lot during the pandemic. But to answer your question, it's because they have their own CE requirements in place, and they treat the exam more as a one and done. Like the exam is, think of it like the NAPLEX for pharmacists or MPJE for pharmacists. They treat it more as a licensure exam, although it is not a licensure exam. Not once the certification lapses. So, if you get certified, it's good for 2 years. If you don't renew after those 2 years, you are uncertified. And so, no, you should not use the CPHT designation if it's expired. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
What is the most somebody has ever done certification? Have they done all of them?
Oh. So the question is, what's the most you mean of the new credentials? That's a good question. I don't know. Wait, who was it? Michelle, right? Sorry. How many have you done? So you're working on your fifth. Yeah. That's a good question. I'd have to look. I'm not sure. I know we have people like Michelle who have exceeded the 4, but I don't know like what the maximum number is. People? So we have 11 now. We have about 4,000 individuals, and about a little more than 8,000 credentials, like excluding sterile compounding and CPHT. There's a pretty, I have the percentages somewhere, just not here. There's a pretty large percentage of people that have earned 1. It's almost like a bell curve, actually. A lot of people in the 2 and 3, and then some people that have gotten to CPHT advanced. So I can look into it further if you're really interested to know. I can dig through and find the maximum number there. Other questions or comments? Yes.
I know technicians that have tried to pass the PTCB certification and have taken it several times. As PTCB, changed their requirements, the number of times you can actually take it?
So no. No, technically there is no maximum. After your 3rd attempt, there's a longer waiting period, and then after the 4th attempt, you have to basically request permission and show documentation that you've either taken training or been tutored by a pharmacist or a pharmacy technician. So there is not technically a maximum number. One of the things that I will say about this is true of all of our exams, but it's especially true about the pharmacy technician certification exam. It is extremely reliable. So if somebody fails the exam, goes back 60 days later and hasn't done anything else, they will very likely fail again. If you look at the pass rate between first-time attempts and repeats, the repeat attempt is always quite low. And so what we tell people is if you have a particular domain, which is shown on the score report, that you are struggling in, make sure you focus on increasing your knowledge in that area, because the exam won't be any easier or harder the next time around. You can expect the exact same result if you don't do anything to change, sort of your knowledge in the area. Yep.
Personal curiosity, I certified in 96.
Okay.
And it was a handwritten exam.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled 2 hours in November in Vermont to get certified, and I just remember we were doing like 4 hours, one pencil and non-programmable,
Mm-hmm.
calculator, a lot of math on it. In your opinion, we have a lot of pharmacy, Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington. We have a lot of students that come and intern with us, and just listening to them about taking their exam. In your opinion, has it changed? I know it's all computerized now, but has the content
Yeah.
changed that much? Because ours was a lot of matching, the brand names to generics. It was the math, figuring drip rates, which we weren't even computerized in Vermont in those days, so had no idea how to figure the drip rate, just kind of tried to guess it. But the content hasn't changed that much?
Yes, so the content evolves over time. So every handful of years, we do a job task analysis, and that is what determines the exam blueprint, and that is what determines sort of the percentage breakdown of each knowledge domain. So the job task analysis, the most recent one was 2016. We're preparing for another one here in the next couple of years. And it's a survey. We had 40,000 technician respondents last time around. You get CE credit for taking the survey because it's a long survey. And so that is what informs the exam blueprint. And so it evolves over time. So if you think about, this is just an example. I'm not predicting that this will end up on the exam. But if you think about immunization administration, right? When we did the job analysis in 2016, no pharmacy technicians were administering vaccines. And now it's very much commonplace, especially in community pharmacy, but not so much in health system pharmacy. And so when we did the most recent version of the exam blueprint in 2020, one of the aims was to make it practice setting neutral. So people, over the years, there's been this perception that the PTCB exam is mostly for hospital and health system technicians. In our view, that is not true if you look at the content, but that was sort of the perception that was out there. And so we really aimed to make sure that the questions and the knowledge statements were reflective of entry-level practice regardless of setting. And so sterile compounding is no longer part of the the initial certification exam because that was primarily a health system-driven task, right? Similarly, billing, those questions in the previous version of the exam were very community-focused billing questions, and so that is no longer part of the exam blueprint. So it evolves over time, to answer your question. And then calculations is not its own domain anymore. It's sort of interwoven throughout all the knowledge domains. And so if you look at the exam blueprint, there's like a little asterisk that indicates that that particular knowledge area might include calculations questions. So, other questions in the last couple minutes here? Yes? Just for fun? Or yeah. I don't know that I mean, I don't know that I would take the initial certification exam again, but you might consider, are you still certified currently? Yeah, I mean, you might consider some of, the credentials that Andrea and Rachel have talked about. I mean, I guess if you wanted to take it again, you could, but I would probably recommend that you look at some of the specialized ones based on what your interests are. Yeah. Yes?
So I'm really curious why certain states require registration where others require certification. I moved to Pennsylvania from Florida 3 years ago, and I was like on the Department of Health website trying to register myself, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
It's not. Do you know what barriers do those states have? What are their arguments? What's the upside for them, like in their view, of not having us registered?
Yeah, well, so in the few states that are remaining, the argument has always been that it's an administrative burden. For example, in one of the states, in Delaware, for example, the commissioner that oversees that just thinks that it's sort of a barrier that's not necessary. Like, we don't need it. There's a cost to it. Like, that's sort of I'm not saying that's a good argument, but that is the argument. In states that have certification requirements or education and training requirements, those are often perceived as barriers by employers and technicians. So to give you an example, there was a state very recently that has long had education, training, and certification requirements in place. And the independent pharmacy group in the state went to that board and said, we are having a really hard time hiring technicians, and we think it's because you have these barriers to entry. And so that state actually got rid of those requirements, right? So now the only requirement is to register. You don't have to go through the education training. You don't have to pass an exam. They require on-the-job employer-based training, but we know that's not necessarily the same. So the arguments really vary. Anything from there's this administrative burden on the regulatory agency to it's a barrier to getting people into the workforce. Yeah, go to the Board of Pharmacy. I think one good place to start could be a state pharmacy association. So if you look across the states, generally state pharmacy organizations have, I don't want to say the most influence at the Board of Pharmacy level, but they have a decent amount of influence. And so going to your state pharmacy association and asking where they stand on that issue is probably a good idea. But then also national organizations, right? We're at AAPT. And then, even some of the national pharmacy organizations like ASHP advocate for stronger education and training standards for technicians. So I would say get involved. Yeah. All right, so I think we are out of time. I see Judy maybe approaching. So I want to please join me in thanking Rachel and Andrea for being up here. Thank you. I'll be around for a little while longer. If you have any questions during the break for myself or any of us, please don't hesitate to say hi. Thanks again for being here and for having us.